from. Okay, maybe I can start. So the title is "Where are the bits and atoms? A perspective on the physical origin and evolutionary nature of information." And we're going to talk about how can we define information based in physics. And you see, I scratched through the word meta, so it's not metaphysics. This is not philosophy. This is supposed to be physics. And where this all started is okay. With the Schrödinger's paradox, and this is a paradox that I know many of you are probably familiar with or have been at least thinking about. And this paradox basically says, how is it possible that if laws of physics in our universe can be expressed so simply, and if we know that entropy is supposed to increase, how comes we don't live in a universe that is an isotropic soup of elementary particles? But no, we see around us everywhere formations and pattern structures, often very complex. And not only do we see these structures, we often see the continuous formation of more complex structures. So this is a little bit paradoxical. And so I want to share some thoughts on that. And doing quite some thinking about this paradox, I came to the insight that the origin, to a large extent, of recurring structural patterns is information. So whereas I first thought of kind of investigating structure formation, my research spun out to be actually about information. And information is the core of this talk and is the core of also the manuscript I'm trying to write about that. It wasn't intended to be like that, but it ended up to be. A lot of the thoughts that I'm going to talk about here I've already written down in a manuscript that I posted on Arxiv, and you can see the URL to that here. So let's start with observation simply. And what can we learn by simply observing the world around us? And let's observe everything. Everything, the whole universe, from the Big Bang till now. What do we see in terms of structure and the origin of structures? Well, within the first hundreds of microseconds of after the Big Bang, already you had the first structure formation in the form of protons. And very soon after, you got nucleosynthesis. And atoms started forming 300,000 years after the Big Bang, and 10 to 100 million years after the Big Bang, you start forming galaxies, structures, large structures. We see the formation of stars, huge structures, planetary systems. And even on these planetary systems, we see structure formations such as, for example, volcanoes here on Mars. There's a Mount Olympus on Mars, or a volcano on Earth. Dune formation on Pluto, on Mars, on Earth. We see formation of rivers and river deltas and lakes, for example, on the moon Titan or on Earth. So we see complex structure formation all around us in the universe. And this formation that happens, all this formation seems to happen spontaneous, what we're seeing here. In the absence of information, there's no information necessarily related to the formation of this. But the first formation of nucleosynthesis and galaxies and planetary systems occurs through symmetry breaking. And then the later complex structure formations, such as volcanoes or rivers or dunes, etc., or precipitation, these are self-organizing processes. But they have in common that they are spontaneous. And we're going to call this layer of structures the physical layer. But soon after Earth was formed, another type of structure formation takes place, that of biological structures, such as cells or multicellular organisms and ecosystems, etc. And here, structure formation is not just spontaneous. No, it is guided by an instruction. And the instruction is in genes, and genes lay in DNA. So now we have a layer, biological layer, based on genes and DNA. And this comes through, here the structures are, the instructions are in genes. And genes and DNA is probably the first form of information that we can see as such in the universe. And as animals became more evolved, became, they started collaborating, for example, with each other. Then we see a new type of structure formation. That is social or cultural structure formation, such as swarming, or the building of nests, or cultural praxis. And all these type of structures that form, they are not occurring spontaneously, and they're not directly based in DNA, but they are based in the information structure in the brain of the animals. So these are mimetic instructions in the brain. And then around 6,000 years ago, we got a new type of information existing. So we had information in the form of genes, and information in the form of memes and brain structure. And 6,000 years ago, we have the start of history. Now we get information not linked anymore to the biological entity itself, but information is now outside the biological entity in written texts. And as written text emerge, so emerges civilization. And these emerge together because civilization needs written text to evolve, and written text needs civilization as the pressure to evolve. So they evolve hand in hand. So now we can have information on inanimate objects. And these types of information, such as, for example, writings on clay tablets, they are interpreted by humans, and they code for something in the civilizational layer. And about, say, 60 years ago, when the computer age really started, then we get written information, but now not anymore interpreted by humans, but interpreted by machines. And that is the start of the cybernetic layer. So, in short, we can observe that low complex structure creation can proceed spontaneously through symmetry breaking or self-organization in the physical layer. However, when it comes to high complexity structure creation, it relies on some instruction code, and we'll call that information. And this information exists either in the form of genes in DNA, or in memes in the brain structure, or as written text or as machine code. So there are 4 different types of information. And my first hypothesis is that when a new material system emerges for information, such as, for example, when DNA emerges or brain structure emerges, this underpins the emergence of a whole layer of self-organization. DNA, no information underpins physics. DNA underpins biology. Memes underpin the cultural layer. Written information underpins the civilizational layer, and machine code underpins the cybernetic layer. And what is information? Well, information is always a physical structure. It's not an abstract concept. It is a physically instantiated pattern structure. For example, I can write on this whiteboard, I can write this. Hello. This is information, a welcome information. But this information is a physical structure of chalk on the black background. And you cannot have information that is not physical structure. And also, something you have to be aware of and keep in your mind throughout this talk, information also exists outside human interpretation. DNA was there before humans were there. So beware of anthropocentrism throughout this talk. So we see that information is a physical structure, and then you have a lot of other physical structures, such as, for example, a dune or a planet or a star. These are also objects. But some structures seem to be information, and other structures are not information. So what makes a structure to be information and other structure not to be information? So what is from a physical perspective, what is information? And not only the question is what is it, you can also see there is relation between the physical structure often and between the information and the external physical structure, such as, for example, between the DNA and the biological layer it codes for. So where is this correlation coming from? And to answer that question, I started looking what is common among all type of information structures that we can observe. And I found 3 commonalities. The first is that for all information structures that I identified, I can see there exist processes that replicate that information. So genes replicate, for example, through cell division. Genetic code is replicated, or through PCR. Memes, my thoughts, what I'm telling you, the thoughts in my head, I can replicate in your head through teaching, and you get it through learning. Yeah? Or in human records, I can ask a scribe to make copies of my plan or whatever. So, and this is true for all of this, all of the information structures. So they can replicate. The second is there exist processes for translating the information. And this is translating is, of course, a term from biology. So you can transfer information to some kind of a phenotype. The genes translate to biological structure. Memes translating to cultural praxis. Human records translate to civilizational structures. And machine records translate into machine actions. And the third thing that they have in common is that they can variate. And I'm going to go in detail what I mean with variate, but the easiest form of variation is random mutation. So for now, you can think mutation. information can mutate. So if I have a gene that's programmed for a certain cell, or a genetic code programmed for a certain cell, then if I make mutations, I will also be able to make cells, but they are variant cells. And this is true for all information. So for example, what I'm teaching you now, you may interpret, but you can maybe improve what I'm telling you. So you can make variants that are perhaps better. So we see that this is the same picture, but now sewn together. So information can replicate, or there are processes for replication. There are processes for translation, and there are processes for variation to make an information variant. And not only that, this variant of the information can also replicate and can also translate. And not only can they replicate and translate, but they can do that using the same mechanisms as the original. And this is very important. So the mechanism for, if I make a plan for a house and I give it to a builder to build my house, I can make a variant of that and give it to the same builder. And he can, he can make, for example, the same builder can make a house that will be different because I changed my plan. So these processes are similar. That's very important. And so what happens actually now, I think this kind of picture we can use to define what is information from a physical perspective. So my hypothesis, the first formulation is information equals or can be defined as a physical structure that has associated replication, variation, and translation processes. But what happens in reality where this is the case? If this happens, if you can make variants of information that are stable and that can also replicate and create their own phenotype, something happens, and that is evolution. So when these three are true, when you have these three processes, automatically you get evolution play. And so this hypothesis, I think, you can reformulate as information equals or can be defined as any physical structure that carries heredity in an evolutionary process. This is a physical definition of information that I propose. And now I can answer the questions I asked. So what causes a structure to be information or not to be information? Well, if the physical structure carries heredity, then it's information. If it does not, it's not information. And what is the relation then between the information and whatever it measures for or it codes for? Well, this correlation is an evolutionary relation. Okay? So the essence of information is that it's the carrier of evolution. And it should be defined as such. That is what I'm hypothesizing. If we want to take this serious, we should also try to formalize it. I've been trying to do that. I've been working quite a bit on that. I don't know if I'm totally ready, but so the way I will try to formalize first, we can define what is a structure. I define the structure either as an elementary particle or as a bound system of constituents. So basically, any matter structure can be a structure. And to look how they form each other, I stole the mathematical framework that is used in physics, and that is a framework of causal set theory. So causal set theory is a discrete mathematical framework describing the fundamental structure of space-time in a quantum gravity context. So I know nothing about quantum gravity. But when I was reading a paper about it and I saw the physical way they described that, I immediately understood that this is I've been trying to draw out the node and edge networks, but when I saw this framework, I understood this is the framework I need to explain how information and how structures evolve. And so I steal their mathematics and I apply it to structure formation. And so basically I make a network. So all structures I identify, I can put in a network. And so every node is a structure, and an edge implicates, for example, if this is node A and this is B, this means that A influences the creation of node B, of structure B. So let's go into, and so what's interesting about writing or making this kind of networks is that they are causal networks and therefore they're Lorentz invariant, which is interesting from a relativistic perspective. You don't have to think of relativistic effects. And so let's look just at a very simple example of how you could do that. And this is very simple chemistry. You have a carbon atom that meets an oxygen atom. They form carbon dioxide. And after a while, they split again into carbon and oxygen. And now I say you can map this space-time. This is a space-time diagram. You can map it to a causal set model. And I just take specific pieces of the world line of these molecules, and I map them to a node, you see? And then I create a causal set that is a reflection of the space-time. So this process, oxidation and reduction, is here shown in a causal set representation. And my hypothesis is here, my third hypothesis is that structure formation can be modeled through causal sets by mapping reality to causal set. I should also say, I'm posing a lot of hypotheses here, and they are somewhere on the scale from totally true to totally false. And there's somewhere, everything I tell is somewhere on the scale from totally trivial to totally groundbreaking. I'm not really sure where I am, but I leave it up to you as an audience to judge that at the end. So I'll be happy to hear your feedback on that. So, and of course, now you have a high flexibility in modeling. So for example, this same reaction I can model in different ways, for example, with a lot of detail or with little detail. But what's important is that I can, the world segments that I can, the smallest I can take is limited by the Planck scale. So basically, in this mapping, what I want to show here is that I can do it in many different ways, but it's always locally finite. You always get a locally finite causal set because the number of nodes is limited by the Planck scale. It can be a large set, but it's locally finite. And this is telling the same thing, but in a symbolic symbolic manner. So such set is reflexive. It's antisymmetric, so that means if one structure A causes the formation of structure B cannot cause the formation of structure A unless they're the same. Of course, they're transitive, so if structure A causes the formation of structure B and structure B causes the formation of structure C, we can say that A causes the formation of structure C. And they're locally finite, what I already showed by saying that's a limit it's limited by the Planck length. Let's continue and let's do that again with examples. The easiest is to look at examples. Here again, we see the same type of chemical reaction, the oxidation of carbon by an oxygen molecule, but here it's catalyzed by a platinum atom. And so this is how a typical physical process could look like, that the platinum binds one of the oxygen molecules in the oxygen atoms in the oxygen molecule, and then makes it available for bonding to the carbon. And then the other oxygen binds to the carbon monoxide that comes from it, and so forms CO2. And you see that the platinum is a catalyst. So the platinum comes out of the process. It is important. It causes the formation of other structures, but it comes out unharmed. And so that is basically, we can, let's first say, if I have a causal set V, for example, any subset, for example, the subset S of such a causal set, any subset that contains at least one edge is a process, is a physical process. Yeah? And a physical process will have an input and an output. You can easily define those. And in this case, what's particular about this physical process is that there is a catalyst, and I call this in general a template. And a template is a structure that is present in both the input and the output, and that is involved in the creation of other structures in the process, but without kind of, being changed itself. And then you can, of course, in set theory, define it in a more stringent way. Examples of templates, of course, catalysts and enzymes, but also tools. For example, if I'm going to build a house and I take a hammer, in the beginning I have my hammer, I use the hammer to build a house, and after I build the house, I still have my hammer. So the hammer is a template in a house building process. So most machines, most tools are going to be templates. Information itself is also a template. I can make a plan for building a house, but when I'm done building, I still have the original plan. So information is also a template. And why is it important to identify which structures are templates and not? Well, this is more from a physical perspective, because I think this is part of the answer to how come that simple laws of physics in a chaotic environment lead to complex structures. Well, that is because they involve templates. Because templates allow the stable and recurrent, again and again, creation of complex structures based on simple input. They can guide the laws. They form a guidance in the process, so the laws of physics create complex structures in a repeatable manner. And that's why it's important to understand there are certain structures that will work as templates. Let's give examples of templates. Here I have a process. This is the printing of a text file from a computer to a sheet of paper using a printer. So I have an operator who has a text file on his computer. He has a blank sheet of paper, a full ink cartridge, and a printer. And at the end of the process, The operator is the same, the text file is the same, and the printer is the same, so they are templates in the process, but the blank paper is now a printed text and the full cartridge is a used cartridge. So this is an example where we have 3 templates in this process. Another example is very simple, a similar example. This is copying a text file using a photocopier. So now we start with a written paper document, and at the end we will have 2 written paper documents. So there's a slight difference from printing, because what we're having here is that actually one of the structures in the output is templated by a structure in the input of its same category. Yeah? When you print something or not, you take an electronic file, turn that into a printed paper. These are 2 different structures. But here we have a paper, a written paper, and we have a new written paper created using itself as it's another structure of its own category as a template. And we're going to need that, of course, to define information replication. So short recap, I hypothesize that we can map space-time regions to causal sets. We can define a process. It's any subset that contains causal relations. A template is a structure that enables the stable and recurrent creation of complex structures and replicates our templates for copies of their own sort. So now we come to information. How can we define information and how can we quantitate information? I will start with a graphical definition of what is information. So imagine you have any causal set. It can look like that. I pose that if in this causal set you can find 5 specific subsets, and they're written here, they're S, S prime, S double prime, triple prime, and S quadruple prime. If I find these 5 subsets, and if in these subsets, in one subset, a structure is replicated, in another subset, that same category structure is translated, in yet another subset, that structure is variated into a variant, and if I find a replication of this variant using the same template, and if I find a translation of that variant using the same template as the original, if I can find these 5 subsets in this causal relation, then by definition, the green nodes are information, the yellow nodes are information variants, and the purple and the orange, they are phenotype. So this is a way of how can we define which structure is information and which not. If you find this type of subsets, you define this node must be information. So my hypothesis, information can be defined as patterns in causal set models of structure creation. And this is saying exactly the same thing, but now in a symbolic notation. Let's go for some examples. So let's look at how such a replication, translation, and variation process can look like. I'm going to go quickly over translation and replication because I already showed them. So I'm going to show one by one these pictures again, these 3, and show how they in reality could look like. So for example, a replication process, we already have that. That was copying a text file using a photocopier is a replication process. And you can see the written document is copied in 2. And then we have the template structures here, the operator and the copier. And I already gave the example also for a translation process, for example, printing a text file from a computer file to paper, where I can see that information here is a text file, the computer file, and the phenotype will be the printed text on paper. And the template here is the printer. Now we come to variation. And I have told before, variation, the easiest way to understand this is mutation, but now I'm going to show what other types of variation we can think of. So variation is basically the change of information into information variant. And the simplest way is, for example, a mutation. And here you see, for example, how a random RNA mutation could be depicted in a causal set. You have RNA, a photon hits it, so it kicks out a nucleotide. So it changes the RNA, but then comes a new nucleotide and binds, and you get a variant of the RNA. So this is a mutation. Sensing is also a way of variation. So in sensing, you have a sensor that is the template, and you have the original sensor data that changes into a variant of the sensor data, and the variant of the sensor data is influenced by an external influence. And the sensor changes the sensor data based on this external influence. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to show that any information processing that you are familiar with can actually be written or can be shown in the form of a causal set. Another example is communication, where you want to send something from a sender to a receiver, and the sender has sender data and the receiver has receiver data. And basically what's happening here is that the receiver data information is changed from its original to variant based on the sender data. And you see the sender data, the sender and the receiver are coming out unhindered, and they will be templates for this process. And the fourth example is, for example, the training of an artificial neural network, where you have the weight space being the information, and the weight space can change from an original to a variant, where the machine that is training the weight space is then, of course, it's a template. This is showing how you can translate our existing information engineering processes into causal sets. That's what I'm trying to show here. So now, how should we quantitate information? If you ask an information scientist how to quantitate information, he or she will probably say it's you should use best is to use Shannon entropy to measure information, which is true to some extent. But I would say if you define information to be the hereditary agent of an evolutionary process, you should quantify it. Information should be quantified by its evolutionary fitness. I'm going to show that this fitness is actually related to some extent also I showed it. So this is the way to do that. For example, if I have a process S with an input and an output, I can simply define fitness as being the number of information copies in the output divided by the number of information copies in the input. So in this case, it's 1, 2, 3 divided by 1, 2. So the fitness equals the fitness of information I in the process S equals 1.5, 1.5. Yeah? And you see this is a fit process. So this information is very fit because it's increasing. Of course, there's processes where the amount of information decreases, and then you see information is dying out. For example, if I make a very bad song and I sing it to you, you're never going to copy it. So it will be 1 here, 0 here. Bad evolution. If it's a great song, you're going to teach it to your kids, and we're going to have a positive growth. Yeah? And so evolutionary fitness, we know from biology, it depends on many different factors. It depends on the success of replication. It depends on the resilience of the structure in the environment. It depends on competition with other structures in the environment. It depends on its own robustness. It depends on the efficiency in which it can replicate, etc., etc. So where now does Shannon entropy come in? Well, Shannon entropy, in essence, measures efficiency in replication. That's what it does. And so Shannon entropy, to some extent, measures evolutionary fitness, but not to the full extent. Let's have a look at some examples from biology. For example, DNA is the carrier of information in biology. And the DNA consists of 4 nucleotides that form base pairs. So the maximum amount of information that the DNA strand can carry is basically 2 bits per base pair. That's the maximum you can get. But now we see, for example, if you study viruses, you see that the average kind of information density in a virus laid in the DNA or in the nucleic acids in the virus will be between 1.9 and 2 bits per base pair. So you see, it's close. It's not 2, it's a bit lower, but it's very close to this maximum. So a virus is extremely efficient in compacting all the information it needs in the shortest possible manner inside its own envelope, so it can efficiently reproduce. It doesn't have to build itself. It doesn't need a lot of building blocks. So it's going to be very efficient. However, this is also going to be very, very, very vulnerable because any change to it will be immediately kill it. And indeed, what we see, for example, the COVID outbreak, the first virus strains that were distributed, maybe they existed for 6 months or 9 months, but already after 9 months, we had variants of viruses that took over instead. So the original virus most likely doesn't exist anymore. What we see in eukaryotic cells, such for example, human cells are eukaryotic cells, here the information density is quite a bit lower. It's typically in the range 1.5 to 1.9 bits per base pair. And why is that? It's because we have redundancy in our DNA. We have non-coding regions, and we have regions in our DNA that can self-repair. Yeah? So it's less efficient, but it's more resilient. Yeah? And so this shows that biology is not trying to go to the highest efficiency. It does not try to minimize the Shannon entropy, but it tries to maximize the evolutionary fitness. And I think this is true for information in all the layers, not only in the biological layer. So we should reconsider how we quantitate information. This is also seen in technology. Of course, if, for example, when you have communication over a limited bandwidth channel, there you need to compress your information as high as possible, and then the Shannon entropy will be a very good measure for the fitness of the process, because this is needed. However, when you write computer code and you try to sell new computer code, of course you need to compact your code as to at least some extent, yeah. But it's not so. This is a Kolmogorov complexity. You will make it as low as possible. But you're not going to push it to the end, because that's ultimately not what's going to drive the economic success of your code. There's other factors that's going to drive the success of your code. For example, how fast can you make it? Or how fast can you distribute it? Not how compact can you make it. Yeah. So here we also again see that efficiency is important, but not all-encompassing. Yeah. There's other things we need to think of. Right. Let's look at self-replicators and revisit our layers of self-organization. What are self-replicators? Well, this is how I define information. Basically, it is the existence of 5 different sorts of subsets in a causal set. And so what I need is, of course, to start with, I need information, and I need a template for its replication, and I need a template for its translation. But for example, in this room, if I have a piece of information here, and one template is in that corner and the other template in that corner, not a lot is going to happen. I will need to transport my information together with my template for something to happen, or to the other template to happen. So this is not very efficient. So if for information to kind of rapidly spread to the environment, it is beneficial if it is bound together in one structure. So all the templates here and all the information is bound in one structure. And we're going to call that a self-replicator. And not only does it contain these elements, it should also contain an element, the template for its own self-replication. And if it does that, we call it a self-replicator. And of course, best example is a cell, a bacterial cell or a human cell. It contains its DNA as an information, and all the molecular machinery is there, but it also contains the code to build its own molecular machinery. Self-replicators you have, but not only in biology, you have them actually in all layers of self-organization. I'm going to show some of that. And why is this important? Because a self-replicator is autopoietic. It means it can make copies of itself. And so therefore it has the potential to fill its environment with replicas of itself, and it will do that at an exponential rate if it's not hindered. So this is the way for information to spread efficiently is through self-replicators. So we have to look, if we want to understand what's going to dominate, we have to understand what are the self-replicators in our layer, in our civilizational layer, or our culture layer, or biological layer. And here's some examples. I'm going to show them. So I should say that the concept of self-replicators is not something that I invented here. Actually, von Neumann's universal constructors is a form of self-replicators. And Kaufman also, when he tried to explain the origin of life, he did seminal work in that. And he called this autocatalytic sets of chemicals that can build each other. These are all versions of self-replicators. But I pose that self-replicators actually exist in all the different layers of self-organization, and we should be able to identify them. I'm going to skip this one. So here we see, again, the layers of self-organization. We got a lot of structure formation without information, and then we call it physics, the physical layer. If the layer is built by genes in DNA, the DNA can translate into biological structures such as proteins, tissue, organs, ecosystems. And self-replicators here are cells and organisms, and they are very efficient in taking DNA strands and bringing them all over the environment, spreading them. And they build together a biological layer. Ideas, memes in the neural structure, they are spread through rituals or through teaching, learning, or through telling stories, or through songs, or through cuisine or community praxis. They're translated like that. And a self-replicator example here is a family. You can think of a traditional family of mama, papa, and the children and the grandparents. And they work together, and when the family grows older, the children form their own families, a new replicated structure with the same structure, and spreading the same cultural praxis to their families. And you can have several families. And this is an efficient way for a culture to spread throughout its environment. The same with writing text. Writing on inanimate structures can be building plans for products or for services, or can be legal code or economic laws, and they are translated, of course, into legal actions or to economic actions. And self-replicators in this layer are organizations or corporations or nations For example, the 7-Eleven store is a self-replicator in the civilizational layer, because you can franchise it, you can copy it many times, and it's very good. And of course, it adapts also, and by selling new products, etc. And so the writing, so the code that determines what should, how should you organize a 7-Eleven is spread by replication of 7-Elevens throughout the world. And together, all this, they form the civilizational layer. And of course, the same can happen with machine code. But now we see something that has not happened here. So in machine code, something that we do not have yet is a self-replicator. I don't know really of machines that are ubiquitously at the moment that can rebuild themselves and spread information throughout the environment just by doing by themselves. Because if they would, they could potentially form the cybernetic layer. We'll get into that in a bit later. So first things that actually I think you can learn from this perspective is that people working. It really highlights actually the potential importance of information and evolution and of fitness and of the self-replicators, and to, I think, having a deeper understanding of that evolutionary framework in, for example, sociology, law, or economics, or politics, could help us in it can give a new perspective in these sciences by seeing economical evolution as a really an evolutionary process of self-replicators, or in the political layer, or in the legal layer, etc. We talked already about the cybernetic layer, which has started but is not yet formed. So, of course, if machines would take over, that is what we see in the movie Terminator, the rise of the machines. Will the machines take over, yes or no? Will AI take over, yes or no? Well, if machines want to dominate, the cybernetics must surpass the evolutionary fitness of the other layers, of the civilization layer, of the culture layer, of the biological layer. If they are more fit, they will take over. Yeah. As long as they are not fit, they can be there, but they can only be there if they rely on a win-win co-evolution symbiosis with the other layers. So if an AI is helping me, I'll be happily spreading it. Yeah? But only because it's helping me. If it doesn't help me, it's not going to spread. Yeah? And of course, there's one thing that could happen is that an AI makes, so everything evolves in a fitness landscape, and it evolves, it gets higher and higher fitness, and then a higher and higher likelihood of spreading. So of course, what can happen is that an AI finds in its fitness landscape a very high point that we can't see, and it can jump there and in that way overtake us. That is a possibility. This is interesting to see, for example, how evolution goes in the biological layer that is driven by genes. So very often in an environment that is quite stable, you will have evolution, but it will go very slowly. Like you have tiny mutations that make tiny changes and maybe a little bit more fit, and then you get a new animal or a new plant that's a little bit more fit. And so you get very small steps, and you grow to a local maximum in your fitness landscape. But you can't make big jumps. This is not possible in biology. Big jumps in biology happen under catastrophic circumstances. For example, an asteroid hits Earth. Suddenly, the entire fitness landscape for the dinosaurs disappeared, and they died out. But it was beneficial for the birds. So the animals taking over after dinosaurs were the birds, because now suddenly the whole landscape disappeared, and now new genes could evolve. This is not true necessarily in the human layer. And one good example of that in the civilization layer is, for example, the invention of the wheel. Like in biology, all animals walk on legs. No animals have wheels. And why not? Because if you would have a wheel structure, if you would have a bloodstream between the main body and the wheel, and that wheel starts turning, the blood vessel would break. You cannot eternally break. So you cannot evolve a wheel in a biological layer. But humans can evolve a wheel because they can think in jumps in the fitness landscape. And so if AI can find higher points in the fitness landscape than we can, and in a more efficient manner, this can be a way for them to take over. Let's finally have a look at some ontological and epistemological consequences. I don't know if you have heard of the book or read the book from Hoffman, The Case Against Reality. It's a very interesting viewpoint. Hoffman says that human understanding of the world, it is not a reflection of the external reality. Rather, it is a user interface crafted by natural selection to support survival and reproduction rather than to disclose the truth. That means that the way I see you, the internal picture in my head of you, may have very little to do about who you are actually. It is just the interface in which I experience you, and this interface makes me reproduce more efficiently. That is what he argues. And this makes sense from, of course, from an evolutionary perspective. And I would argue that this principle is actually universally true. In the same way that the structure of a DNA is nothing like the structure of the biology it codes for, you know. But of course, they are still related. So how can we understand, of course, now thinking of that, it's of course important to think which information is true and which information is false, and how can we think about that in the framework that I'm sketching here. Well, truth of a statement is determined by its logical coherence within a specified theoretical framework. For example, I can make the statement 1 + 1 = 3. This statement is not logically coherent within the theoretical framework of mathematics. Therefore, we say it's false. And where does fitness come in? Well, the usefulness or the validity of the theoretical framework of mathematics, that is determined by the evolutionary fitness of mathematics. Why do we have mathematics as it is? Or mathematics is a structure in your brain, it's an information structure in your brain that occurred in the civilisational layer because it aids its evolutionary fit to have good mathematics to aid engineering in the civilizational layer. And therefore, mathematics has evolved to be what it is because it helps us to reproduce ourselves and to build civilization and civilization structures. And so fitness comes from the framework, not from the statement. The statement, you can only look, is it true or not, by its logical coherence with the framework. And this you can now make interesting thinking. For example, if Donald Trump claims that he won the 2020 election because the elections were stolen, is that true or not? Well, in the framework of science, it's not true because you can make measurements and you would see, no, this was this was a fair election and he did not win it. But in the political layer, yes, it's true because it's very fit. I mean, his ID that he lost has caused him to win the elections. So you can see from a political framework, it is a true statement. So this is a way you can start thinking about what is truth. And I don't know, I haven't thought this through in detail, but I think there's things you can do with that. Science is interesting. We are all scientists. And what is science? Science is also an information structure in our head. And it is it's an information structure in the civilizational layer. And it has a very high evolutionary fitness because it's built to be fit. It is inherently formed to be self-correcting. Whenever we have an empirical measurement that contradicts something that is in the science framework, we will change the scientific framework to fit again to the external reality. And so science is probably the most fit framework we have in our brain at the moment because it's self-correcting in that manner. Right, some conclusions, and next up, we're running out of time otherwise. So I propose 6 hypotheses. Let's go over them. I propose that the creation of complex structures can be modeled through causal sets. Information can be identified through specific patterns in these causal sets, and that's how you can define information from a physical perspective. And then if you do that, you actually form that information equates the hereditary agent of evolutionary processes. And it should therefore be quantified to its evolutionary fitness. And we see that specific information materials, such as nucleic acids or brain structure or clay tablets or paper, the emergence of specific information materials induce specific layers of cell organization. A totally new way of information processing will give rise to a new layer of cell organization. And in these layers of cell organization, it is self-replicators that are autopoietic, that efficiently fill their environment with copies of the information. So these are 6 hypotheses. They're true or false, and either they're totally trivial or they're groundbreakingly new. I leave that up to you. I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and I would like to make a paper on this. But I have not been able to discuss this with anybody. So you're the first people I really propose these theories to. So I'm dead serious to hear, what do you think? Is this trivial or groundbreaking and false or true? So if you're online, I don't know how many people there are, but please, if you can click in the chat field a number. So if you think this is totally true but totally trivial, click 11, write 11 in the chat field. Or if you think that, well, it's it's not totally trivial, but not groundbreaking, but totally false, you would write 5-3. So please write what you think. I need feedback. So give me feedback. Where do you think this theory stands? Because if you all think it's trivial and false, I should stop doing this. And if not, I should continue doing this. I need to know that. My only partner I've been talking to here is ChatGPT, and ChatGPT has been super, says I'm so totally novel and everything is so fantastic. But I'm not sure I can believe it. So I also would like to, if you're interested, I'm interested in collaborating. For one, this is a theory, so it needs to be tested. And I think, for example, cellular automata could be a very good way of testing some of these things. I don't have the capacity to do that at the moment. I'm a lonely person. So if you want to collaborate or think that we should have a common, master thesis student or something, I'll be very happy. I'll also be happy to sharpening the formal framework, the set theory underlying this causal set to make this fully, because I'm sure there's mistakes in what I've been writing so far. So that should be sharpened if you're interested in that. And not on the list, I think there's much deeper questions we can look into this. And they're often related to the alignment or non-alignment of fitness in the different layers. For example, in the cultural layer, we have, once we start interacting, organisms start interacting, the feeling of justice emerges. And we should treat each other just. And it's not humans that think that, even animals, you can say they have a feeling for justice. That's in the cultural layer. Now, in the civilizational layer, we have a legal framework. And the legal framework is built to give you legal security, not to give you justice. But somehow we presume that the legal framework and the feeling of justice, that they should be aligned. So we see different self-replicators or different concepts in different layers should be aligned, or we presume them to be aligned, but they are not always aligned. And what does that mean? For example, a totalitarian state can be super efficient, but it makes the biological layer very unhappy. And is that possible? Is that long-term possible? Yes or no? Can this way of thinking be a way to address some of these questions? I don't know. So if you're in law or in economy or sociology or politicology, and you think this is an interesting framework to look at some of these questions, take contact with me. For example, sustainability. How can we understand sustainability throughout these layers, and how should we think about that? I think there's things to be learned, and I would like to do that with other people if possible. Right?